fire!
315 and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fire west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Hey, welcome back to the show with Mike and Jim. So we're going to talk about how we come up with tactics today. And the thing about tactics is that it's kind of a punchline that a lot of us use. We call ourselves Tactical Tangents. We talk about tactics and cool guy stuff as part of our little project here. But what is actually a tactic? I think at some point, Jim, you and I talked about what the word tactical means, right? Like, I'm pretty sure in another episode we covered that.
And there's a difference between tactical and tactics in this context, right? Tactical in a marketing sense is like anything meant for selling to the military or law enforcement, whatever.
Right.
For a long time, it was anything that was black was tactical, or anything that was dirt brown was tactical.
Multicam.
In military parlance, it refers to like scaling, right? If we're at the level of fight where individuals are fighting individuals, that's the tactical level. And then above that, groups of individuals are operational. Above that is strategic.
Right.
But that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about tactics as in specific best practices.
So, and kind of looking at that, like you talked about the tactical level problems, to me, it's addressing problem solving, right? If you're talking about what is a tactic is sort of a structure or a strategy for solving a problem. And so in law enforcement, you have stuff like, if you think about what SWAT teams often do, it's the hostage rescue, right? How are we going to deal with this problem where if we have to go in and save the hostage, they're going to see us coming a mile away? How are we going to deal with the fact that they're going to have the initiative? How do we deal with, for example, a barricaded fugitive that doesn't want to come out of a house? Well, we've got tactics for that, right? It involves tear gas often, but that's kind of what we're talking about is dealing with problems. That's
and on the military side, it's the same thing. So in flying, I have to kill a radar guided surface to air missile. Well, I got a lot of options, a lot of ways I could do that. I could just go straight into it. I could just drop a dumb iron bomb on it. But maybe there's a way that I could do it safer. So out of all of my options, I test the options I've got, and I figure out which one is going to increase the risk to him to a maximum and decrease the risk to me at a minimum. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with this show, is talk about how we develop that and how we find the right tactic. And the difference between that and a procedure, right? We have rules, and some tactics are so ingrained that they're treated like rules. But the point of a tactic is we have to be able to change them, and we have to be able to learn and develop and adapt them.
It's got to be a framework thing, and it's framework. And you think about it like an outline. You've got bullet points, and you still have to fill in the bullet points, and it's also options. So my tactic for dealing with this kind of problem involves these options, right? Or this kind of algorithm. But obviously we're always talking about flexibility and adaptability, and that has a lot to do with it. When we're talking about what tactic we're going to choose in any given problem, and again, we're going back to looking at a tactic as a strategy to solve a particular problem, we have to consider the difference between the what and the why. So, for example, if I'm talking about tactics in clearing a house or clearing a structure of some kind, close quarters combat is what the military would call it. One of the things that comes up is when you're going into a room, if you're going to go left or you're going to go right, which way you're going to turn when you go in a doorway. And it's not really about what the answer to that question is so much as why do you choose the one that you choose? And when you really intuitively understand where your problem areas are as you're approaching a doorway into a room, that is where you start to understand what tactics mean, because it's not about deciding before you get there which direction you're going to go. It's about, as you're approaching it, being able to make that decision according to the framework in your mind on where your threat areas are. So there's, with any set of decisions like that, you're going to have a little bit of deliberation that has to happen before you get in that situation. And part of that deliberation is understanding the pros and cons of your options, right? So if I know that going into a room, for example, there's an area that I can see and an area that I can't see, well, obviously, if I can see part of the room, then the area that I'm most worried about is whatever I can't see. So, well, what's the problem with that? So do I want to go in and, we're not going to get into the specific room entry type of tactics, but you kind of get the idea of the conversation that has to happen when we're coming up with that strategy, right? That's what we're getting at when we're talking about tactics and problem solving. So as you go through this process and you come up with a problem, you decide that there's something that needs solving, right?
And I would jump in on that with, fundamentally, this is about learning as a unit or as an agency. And the lessons learned. Well, that didn't work. you know, hey, we went right. Obviously, that was a bad answer. Next time, let's go left or whatever, right? We tried to kill this surface-to-air missile a certain way. Well, we lost 15 airplanes doing that. Let's not do it that way again, right?
Yeah.
So having this focus on being a learning organization is what gets you better tactics.
And one of the things that comes up in this is like having initiative, right? You want to not be, and we talked a little bit about this, the flexibility, adaptability thing. You want to be flexible enough that, you're not stuck in this rigid framework in terms of tactics. That's not what tactics means. Again, it's just having something that before you've gotten into that fight, there's been some decision making that's happened and some principles that are guiding your movements throughout that encounter, right? And when we're coming up with this stuff, you have to come up with something that is consistent enough that you can start to test and evaluate. And like Jim said, kind of learn from your mistakes and shape and adapt as things go forward. So it starts with a problem to solve, right? And when you come up with one of these problems, and again, I use the example of, a suspect is barricaded in a house. He doesn't want to come out, right? Another one we can talk about is you've got an officer that gets wounded in a gunfight with a suspect, and now he's stuck out in the middle of the street in the open. How am I going to get to him safely, not exposing myself to the bad guy, and then move him to safety? So you take that problem, and you've got to start addressing how much time and how much resources we're going to put into trying to solve this. And there's a lot of questions and variables that go into that. For example, how much risk is involved? If the risk is relatively low, or if it's a type of risk that we're always going to have time to make these decisions, well, then you can probably just make that decision when the time comes up, because you'll have some time to plan and come up with the solution. If the risk is high, or the severity is high enough that you're not going to have time to think about it, then you need to have some options. Kind of, Jim, the aviation stuff that Jim talks about is the bold-face plans, right? In-flight emergencies. You have an engine fire, and you've got like your checklist, and you're going to go right to it, right? So
I don't have to think about it. I'm just going to do it.
Right. Or tap rack, right? Not necessarily a tactic. It kind of is. It fits in with the problem of.
It started as a tactic. It was something one guy did and shared with his bros, and then it grew into procedure. And some good tactics should be procedures.
Right. Immediate actions.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at one of those things, my gun is going to malfunction. Well, how much time do I have to solve that problem? The rest of my life, potentially, right? Or the in-flight emergency thing, your engine's on fire. How much time do you have to solve that problem? Well, when you look at those problems, you're going to tell yourself, okay, we need to have this figured out long before we're ever in that mess, right? So identifying that problem, part of that involves deciding how much risk is involved, and how serious of a problem that is to solve, and how often it's going to come up.
Yeah. So I like risk management in general, and you hear me talk about it on almost every show. And one of the reasons I like it so much is it helps me to analyze tactics and assess what's a good tactic and what's a bad tactic. Where am I buying down my risk and where am I buying more risk? And you need to consider, when you're making decisions about this, frequency versus severity. How often is this coming up? How much am I willing to dedicate toward preventing it? And you have to consider, what are the unintended consequences of doing this tactic? Maybe like a law enforcement agency, as an example, you have a barricaded suspect. You guys have some cool sensor that lets you figure out where in the room he is. You shoot him with a .50 caliber sniper rifle. it will work. You will take them down. However, maybe there's some unintended consequences to doing that. Maybe you take out whatever's behind them, right? So you have to assess what is this buying me? What is this potentially costing me?
And the other thing that comes with that is bad guys have tactics too. So if we start understanding problem solving and looking into why bad guys are doing what they're doing, you'll start to be able to get ahead of them a little bit in the curve of, action versus reaction and trying to beat them in some sort of conflict. So in a recent episode, we talked about information security. And one of the things that came up was social engineering. And that people are going to be resistant to just giving you information that you want, or that there's going to be security measures in place, such as locked doors or cameras or passcodes or whatever. But if the bad guy is clever enough to socially engineer his way into the building, play it off like he's a janitor or construction worker. We had a group of people that were stealing cars, and they were going to the rental car lot at the airport, and they were wearing traffic vests. And so when they'd wander around the rental car lot looking for a car to steal, they blended in effectively. Think about the irony in that. They blended in by wearing a bright green or bright orange reflective vest and standing out in broad daylight, right? They were hiding in plain sight. So there's a tactic there where they're moving around that problem, right? The other one that you'll see, and stolen cars is a good example, is bad guys will take a license plate from a not stolen car and they'll swap it, right? So that when I run the license plate, it comes back as clean because it doesn't belong to that car. The car that's actually stolen,
the license plate's clean, the car's not.
Exactly. And so you have kind of 50-50 chance on whether the people who have the stolen license plate recognize that their plate was missing. So understanding the bad guys' tactics are also an important part of this in terms of problem solving, because it presents a whole new set of problems for you, and it lets you obviously get ahead of them.
And I think that's a good point as far as tactics in general, not just bad guy tactics, is thinking about when I'm trying to solve a problem, how do I sidestep the problem entirely?
Yep.
There's a saying in my community, the best time and place to kill a fighter pilot is in his bed. You don't get in a dogfight with an American fighter pilot ever. You kill him while he's asleep, or you kill him when he's in the dining hall, right?
Yeah.
And that, deviousness and cleverness and guile is kind of the essence of what we're shooting for in terms of tactical decision making and tactics development. And that's one of the reasons why Mike and I are both really, really into the OODA loop, was a big part of what Boyd was trying to teach. And one of my favorite examples in this podcast, I'm going to keep going back to killing a surface-to-air missile because it's a common tactical problem for American airplanes. Maybe I don't have to shoot it with a bomb. Maybe I can cut the power to it. I get the same effect, but I didn't risk my airplanes to do it. Maybe I feed a computer virus into the, climate control system, and I crank the heater on it in a rack. So it's 120 degrees out, and now it's 190 degrees inside. I wonder how long they're going to stay staring at the radar scopes, and it's a hypothetical, but it's a fun one.
You send them an email chain letter and see if they open it. Be the Nigerian
from a Nigerian prince.
Yeah. So one example of this too is if you think back to September 11th, where were we looking for threats? We use Jim's surface-to-air missile example, right?
Yep.
We weren't looking for bad guys just as passengers in commercial aircraft. That changed the entire landscape for us in terms of what I think they're calling now fourth generation warfare and insurgencies and those sorts of conflicts, right?
And there's a great book about 9/11 specifically and the tactics and the worldview we had called Ground Truth. That's the name of the book, by a guy named Farmer. He was on the 9/11 Commission. We're going to link to it in the show notes. Ground Truth by Farmer.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about, at the time we were really worried about Russian cruise missiles off the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And
how's that working out?
Yeah, that was not the problem. So we were super tactical about that but not looking in the right direction. As far as that, again, that risk management, the frequency severity thing.
Making it relatable to the OODA loop. Remember how we said back in the OODA loop episode that your orientation, your individual orientation, or I guess doctrinal
Worldview.
orientation, even if we're looking at as a nation, controls not only what you see but where you look. And so if you're looking at the Russians and you're watching for cruise missiles and fighter jets, you're going to miss the guy with the traffic vest wandering the parking lot, or the guy in the passenger in the commercial airliner. So that just kind of takes it back to the Boyd thing. So how do we come up with this stuff? If we're talking about problem solving and trying to come up with a new idea or a new way to sidestep a problem, where does that creativity come from? That's it's a difficult question, right? And I think there's some cultural stuff that goes into this in terms of having smart people involved in the process in whatever organization or setting, even if it's just a business, right? You run a business and you're trying to work around your competitors. You need to have people that are kind of the visionary type of people that can look ahead and use their imagination. Consider that at some point in our history, we thought the idea of landing on the moon was probably insane. There were probably people that thought, like, what are you, nuts? Like, how on earth, no pun intended, would you ever pull that off? And somehow
there are still people who think that it didn't happen. Right?
Yeah, right. And so from a doctrinal standpoint, there has to be people in your organization or in your business or in your team or whatever who that is their job, right? Or at least, have that ability to kind of think outside the box. Where does experience play into that? Well, one of the examples that I talk about when I use the OODA loop in terms of decision making, if you're going to make a decision, part of what experience gets you is a range of choices, right? You've seen different problems and different solutions, and I always go back to like a shoot no shoot situation for a police officer. You're in a situation and a guy's pointing a gun at you. Is that a shoot or a no shoot? Obviously, that's a shoot. You walk into a room and the guy doesn't have a gun. Is that a shoot or a no shoot? That's a no shoot, right? So you've got two pieces of information now, or two examples to dial back or refer back to.
Two branches on the decision tree.
Right.
Right.
And so what happens when you walk into a room and there's a guy with a knife? Okay, now there's a third one, and which one does it fit into? Well, now we have to start having that talk about time, distance, and shielding, right? How much we're on the reaction time, how far away is he? Is there anything between me and him? And we start going into these it depends things, right? And then we go down those paths, and we can start adding branches to that decision-making tree to the point that you have this huge index of solutions, this huge file cabinet of choices to choose from, right? And that is important for experience, because when you're trying to find a file that fits, a new problem, a novel problem, isn't always going to have its own file. You're going to have to take, a couple or three or four and say, well, it's kind of like these. How can I blend these together and make them sort of the same thing? And again, we go back to Boyd because we're kind of fanatics about his way of thinking. Building that snowmobile, right? You're taking, and if you're not sure what we're talking about, one of our previous episodes, snowmobiles, I think, is in the title. You can look it up. But he used this thought experiment thing where he would take bits and pieces from several different images and build a new reality out of it. And so he took pieces from 4 different pictures, and he was able to kind of blend those into a new picture of a snowmobile, right? And we'll save you the long spiel on it, but that's in a nutshell, that's what it is. So, but you need experience that's relevant enough that you have those files to choose from. And you've got to be able to relate to it.
And I would jump in on that with, you need organizational experience, and you have to capture your organization's experience, because you're not going to live long enough to learn all those lessons all by yourself, right?
Make all the mistakes over and over again.
So you have to capture that somehow. In a flying squadron, we have a tactics office, and one of its jobs is to capture lessons learned. We go on an exercise. At the end of the exercise, you write up a hot wash after action report, and you say, hey, it would have been nice if we had brought this with us, or it would have been nice if we had made sure this radio worked before we tried to check on and couldn't check on with anyone. And So having an office that is dedicated to writing stuff down, that's one of the differences between science and screwing around is writing stuff down, and also getting some stats. You mentioned the knife thing. Well, whether it's a shoot or no shoot, a lot of that for me has to do with how often are my guys getting hurt with knives. If in the history of my agency no one's ever actually gotten stabbed, then I'm probably going to degrade that in terms of my risk assessment. Or if every time a knife comes out someone's going to get killed, then I'm going to elevate that in my risk assessment. Yeah. But you only get that if you've got stats on it, if you're capturing lessons.
One of the things that I was thinking about when we started kind of teasing out this idea for an episode was, we're pretty good at least in my professional circles about debriefing stuff. We'll take after any call or any incident or whatever, we'll sit down and we'll pick it apart. We'll come up with lessons learned. And one thing that I want to dive into at some point, and I'm not sure it fits into this episode as its own topic, but just as an aside, is how you take those lessons, and this is what Jim is talking about. You take those lessons that are learned, and how do you incorporate those into practice? So, for example, one of the things that always comes up in major incidents, an active shooter or something like that, just about any debrief you'll ever find on that, there'll be some commentary about communication. There'll be some commentary about span of control. Those things always come up. And there's always lessons learned where, in hindsight's 2020, we can look back and we think of all these great ideas. The good idea fairy keeps coming around and saying, oh, we should have done this and we should have done that. Well, why is it that we're never able to take those things, codify that some way, incorporate that into training and turn that into practice? I don't have the answer to that. And that's why it's got to be its own episode, I think, to at least tease that out, because I don't think we're going to be able to answer that question. That's a tough one, but you get the idea. How do you take the history of those lessons and actually make sure that you're adjusting accordingly, right?
I got one suggestion on that, and it feeds into all this, is that you can't just state a problem. You can't say, well, communication sucked. That gets you nowhere. It's always going to suck. You have to, and this is part of like being a leader and dealing with bosses. Bosses don't handle just being handed problems well. You have to hand them a problem with a solution. You have to say, communication sucked. Here's why. It sucked because we don't all use the same lingo. So we all need to get onto the incident command structure.
Yeah, incident command system. Yep.
The ICS. We all need to get on board right now. Or we couldn't talk on the same radio. We need one channel for this entire region. Bosses, get us on one channel, or set it up for that.
Or the same token, everyone was on one channel and that channel was too cluttered, and so some of us need our own, right?
Yep.
And then what happens when we go on our own channel, and then you have people, there's overlap in responsibilities, and then things are getting set aside. So, yeah, those are. I think we've come a long way in a lot of those examples. But it still comes up. And again, I don't have the answer, but I think when we talk about tactics and we talk about problem solving, that definitely needs to be factored in, is how do we make sure that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over? And again, I go back to in a distribution of people on your team, you need to have some people in there whose job it is to be kind of the visionary, right? And to think about that sort of thing.
And I imagine, I'm not a cop, but I imagine this is different in different agencies, that in a lot of places, the SWAT team is where a lot of that resides. The tactical expertise and the guys who are out there trying stuff. And so maybe that is kind of the tactics office of a law enforcement agency.
Yeah.
What worries me is when I hear tactics instructor in the context of law enforcement, it's often the guy who's just good at fighting or enjoys it.
Or it's the guy with seniority.
The
spot was open, and he was the guy that was buddies with the dude that he was an academy classmate with the guy that's now a commander that's going to pick that guy.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily what you need for tactics development. You need the guy who can balance operational reality, so not just a book nerd, with the ability to write stuff down and the ability to capture stuff, and the guy who's going to be in the room to help drive policy a little bit and doctrine. And you need an office because this is work. You have to write stuff down. You have to capture statistics.
And I think that's part of the problem is that it's when you're mission focused, when you're dealing with problems every day, right? It's hard to take people out of it and assign them to like, hey, your job is just going to be to look at this
office and count pencils.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of creativity that comes with this, and there's certain personality types I think that do well. One thing that I struggled with for a long time, my own personality, like just some insight on how I approach this is I will constantly come up with new ideas, and so much so that maybe like I'll overthink or overanalyze stuff, or I'll come up with it's like seeing shiny objects, right? And so if you look at a group of people or a team, you're going to have a distribution where on one end you have like the creative, innovative types who are constantly looking at those shiny objects. I tend to think I probably fall in that category. On the other end of that spectrum or that bell curve are going to be the people that are stuck in their ways and they refuse to evolve, or they're incapable of evolving.
I worked with a guy who's a lot like that, who's kind of like a cartoonish extreme of that.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. We'll call this guy Bart. And one of my sayings about the guy, he was kind of a space alien, personality-wise. He's clearly from another planet. But the guy came up with like 100 ideas a minute. He was an ideas guy. He was a smart guy, read a lot of books and stuff. And
sounds familiar.
Yeah. And he would come up with 100 ideas a minute, and 80 of them would be pretty good. 20 of them would be stupid and dangerous, and he couldn't tell the difference. And he would try to turn all of his ideas into policy. He was just high enough ranking where he could actually make some rules, and he would present all of them like they were like, okay, this is how we're doing it. And it took several of us to stop him and be like, dude, right, that is stupid and dangerous. You're gonna get us killed if we do that. So don't do that.
Well, and that's kind of the point, really. And the reason I bring up this distribution of people thing is because in any group or in any organization, you're going to have the people on one end who are super stuck in their ways, and the people on the other that are
the crazy guy,
right? And then in the middle, you're going to have a whole bunch of go with the flow types that are just like,
or guys who just want to keep doing it the way they've always done it.
Right.
And I imagine that's a big problem in both military and law enforcement.
Yeah.
Well, this is how we did in Vietnam, so we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But I think I think there's a leadership thing, right, that comes with fostering a culture where you recognize that everyone has something to bring to the table in that sense. Yeah. And so all of those personalities have to be involved.
Yeah. So I have a way to get into this. And the military, at least the Air Force, has kind of a formalized process where we solicit new tactics. We ask for tactics improvement proposals, like you fill out a form and turn it in. And what I would offer is most people in our communities, military, law enforcement, and civilian defense for that matter, are passionate about what they do. Most of them have what I would describe as like the bar-napkin solution, right? They've sat down and they have some good idea of how they think we ought to be doing business.
Yep.
And what I would offer is formalize that a little bit. You don't have to have a standardized form, whatever, but once a year or once a quarter, whatever, sit down and say, hey, if you've got a good idea for how we should be doing business, write it down, put it on a PowerPoint slide or a bar napkin, whatever, and turn it in. And let's have a group of people who are smart look at it. And you get that spectrum. You get the crazy guy, you get the gruff, like, I don't like anything new guy, and you get them in a room and you have them all look at it.
Yeah. So going back to that idea that we've got to have that entire spectrum and we have to capitalize on that. I agree with the bar napkin thing. That's a big deal. And I think there's another side of this that we have to play into that, and it's one that I deal with all the time at work, where I hear people like, they'll bitch and complain about all the things that we got wrong, and that's not being part of the solution, right? And so if you think you got those ideas or you think you have a solution, don't expect that someone is going to come like knock on your door with a search warrant demanding it, right? Like you have to carry that flag a little bit and get it to the right people and
put your money where your mouth is.
Put your money where your mouth is. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you think you got a better idea, then act on it. And that's kind of another element we'll get into here in a minute. So how do we capitalize on this creativity stuff? So that's part of it. It's a people thing, and we go back to people, ideas, and hardware, right? What you'll see oftentimes is people want a hardware solution. That's a real easy one because we could just throw money at a problem, right? We go back to the people and the ideas, and that's what we're talking about. We've got those good idea fairies, the people who, hindsight's 2020, and after the fact, they've got a lot of criticism and they've got a lot of crap to talk, and they have a lot of good ideas that they didn't have in the middle of the crisis, but now they have, now they've got all the answers.
Thanks,
We've got
bro.
to try to capitalize on that. Yeah, thanks for the help.
Thanks, dude. You're really helpful.
Yeah. And so we have to have a way of brainstorming this stuff and coming up with some options, right? Jim mentioned earlier how sometimes we want to try to find a way around problems. There's oftentimes going to be those problems that you look at and you go, is this really a problem at all? Like, do we even need to make this an issue, or is there a way we can sidestep this altogether?
I have a good example from that. I was reading a book about U.S. Marshal operations, and they were talking about how, they'd have, and Mike has his own background with them.
They're great guys. That's
not my business. What is my business is they were trying to do a big roundup of wanted dudes in a given area, and they were trying to figure out the problem. How do we don't have the people, the resources, the manpower, whatever, to go find all these people. How do we get them? How do we get them in one room? And they were all just sitting around, probably drinking beers, and they're like, well, maybe we can get them to come to us. And they organized a telemarketing call to each of them and said, hey, you won a trip to the Bahamas. Just come to this hotel, conference room and sign in and make sure you bring a photo ID so that we know it's you. And we will, and they dolled it up to make it sound very official and very like, absolutely, you're going to the Bahamas. Or I think it was a free TV. For some of them, they downgraded it based on expectations or whatever. And they got like 80 dudes to show up. And so, like, that's the thing about tactics development. And I can see Mike and I, if you can't tell, we're seeing each other remotely through VTC. I can tell he's thinking about something he did that he probably can't talk about.
Nope.
But that's why I'm talking about this, because I can talk about it because I read about it in a book. But you can screw with them. And that's one of the things that I love about tactics is you can be devious,
Yeah, I got clever friends. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you got to think about ways around the problem. And we go back to that innovator type, the creative guy. You have to let the crazy guy talk. That guy has to get a say. And I think, again, going back to leadership and building a strong culture within your organization is making sure that you recognize that and making sure that those guys have a stage, because at some point someone's going to think it's a good idea to go to the moon, and we might actually be able to pull that shit off. So
yeah, and a lot of organizations hate that, right? Yep. You've got a team that's high functioning, and then there's that guy who just won't shut up. And
some organizations go out of their way to get rid of those people because they don't want them threatening the status quo.
Yep. And what I have found are the organizations that are really high functioning, the ones that do the crazy stuff, that's a motto for them. The Israeli Mossad, that's a saying in Mossad, is let the crazy guy talk. That's where I learned it from. Certain special operations units. One of my favorite things about that is John Warden, who is kind of like a Boyd character.
Yeah, we've talked about him on the podcast.
We've talked about him a little bit. One of his things is plan in the open. And that freaks out military people. Most of our planning, we try to do it super duper secret. We do it in a vault instead of a vault. And John Warden's like, no, let's do it in an auditorium. And freaked people out. And so he was doing some of the Desert Storm planning in the Pentagon. And literally he opened up an auditorium and he said, if you've got some good idea, some bar-napkin, I want you to show up with it.
Well, imagine, like you talked about, we'll solicit ideas. Imagine like there's a military contract process. It's like, hey, if you know how to beat this beat the Russians, we're looking for ideas. And the Russians would be like, oh my God, all these people are going to be, coming up with shit.
That's a real thing that we really have. In the Air Force, it's called AFWorks. There's also a SOCOM version called SOFWorks. And that's exactly what it is. It's a giant pot of money. If you got a good idea, here's a check, which is kind of cool.
So the question becomes, when you get one of these good ideas, at what point do you decide to go with it? That's hard because, landing on the moon is dangerous. It turns out. Yeah. And so if you come up with that and you start to think it's plausible, when do you give that a shot, right? When do you test it? When do you vet it?
And I'd say you start at the bar-napkin phase and you start doing some freaking homework. And that's hard. A lot of us are, people of action, and sitting and reading a book is a pain for a lot of us, but you got to do it because odds are good your idea has already been tried.
Right.
And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but you need to go figure that out. Find out if someone else has already done it and whether it's working or not and what it is they did that made it work or didn't. Go do the homework. Go find out the statistics.
At least look for the similarities, right? The thing, you might find ideas that were similar, and then you can look at those and say, okay, Desert One, right? Desert One was the Iranian hostage rescue attempt back in the late 70s. What didn't work then, right? And then you can start looking at like, okay, well, these were the failures that happened. These were the mistakes and the problems, and you can start picking those apart and saying, okay, how is this idea different? Or how can we make it different, right?
Or how has the world changed since then?
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably get away with a lot of the things they were trying with the night vision goggles we have now that we didn't have in 1980. So that's thing one. Thing two is go find people who are smarter than you and not inclined to agree with you. Go find smart people who disagree and talk to them about it. Go find a subject matter expert. Find the smartest dude in the world on whatever that topic is. Another one is Intel. Go to the Intel weenies and pick their brains and find out what the bad guys are really doing and put your idea up against that a little bit.
Kind of part of the soliciting the bar napkin thing. Like if you're the guy that's looking for a solution, or if you have an idea, maybe you do kind of informally the same thing that, the Air Force tactics offices do. And you go out and you go, hey, if you had to solve this problem, like, what would you do? Go to different people just kind of informally and start testing it a little bit. And like, well, what do you think about this? Like, what would the problem be with that? And they'd say, well, that's actually a good idea. Or that would work if X, Y, and Z, or the problem with that idea is whatever. And you could start to tease it out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, you have to kind of, as it starts to gain traction and you start to get a good idea, you've got to render support for it. And this goes back to one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier, is fostering this environment where you have people whose job it is to explore this sort of thing, right? And there's ways you can politic for it. Sometimes, and I mentioned that you'll have people that kind of will informally, bitch and complain and have all these great ideas, but they don't want to put their money where their mouth is, right? Maybe you grab one of those guys and you go, hey, you know how you said you wanted to pull off X, Y, and Z, or you thought this was the answer? Like, maybe there's a way you could bring them in and you can start making some movement, making some progress with it, right? Or, if you are quietly trying to get support for it and it's not going well, you wait for that opening where something goes, not necessarily wrong, but something happens to where you have kind of that I told you so moment. And I'm not saying that you should look for the opportunity to go shame anybody or anything like that, but you might get that perfect example.
Opportunity
where like, boom, this would have fit in perfect, and you can jump on it, right? Part of that bar napkin process that Jim is talking about is you've got to look for the holes in it, and you have to find the people that disagree with it and start coming up with the strategy for how you're going to deal with the people that want to shoot you down or that are negative about your idea, right?
And one of my favorite things is murder board. You convene 5-6 people, again, smart senior dudes, get a mix of people in a room, and you present the idea to them. And you ask them to try to figure out ways to kill it. And among other things, often it'll buy you buy-in from those very people.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you are willing to kind of evolve and shape yourself with it. And so this is we look at that distribution of people, right? And you know that there's going to be the people that are really set in their ways, and you know that there's going to be the shiny object types. And especially if you recognize that you're the shiny object type and you're the one that's championing this new idea, right? You've got to be willing to look kind of yourself and your idea in the mirror and go, okay, what about this am I really, really adamant about? And what sacrifices am I willing to make? Or what feedback am I getting that maybe this idea can evolve a little bit, right? So as you test it and you start moving forward with it, at some point you might realize that, it's not perfect, but it's progress. And you have to be willing to accept, kind of give what you're willing to get, right? And you also have to be open enough to recognize that, like, maybe you test it and maybe it's not going well, and you have to be willing to kill it. Because, like Jim said, you'll have that guy who's full of ideas and they're not good at vetting the good ideas from the bad ideas, and they're just powerful enough to take one of those bad ideas and make it policy. You don't want to be that guy, right? So part of being that innovative, creative type means you've also got to kind of have that detachment from your own ideas to recognize that, hey, maybe not all of these ideas are going to work or going to be good, right? So then the question becomes, when is it ready? And this is where Jim's expertise comes in currently, I think.
Yeah, you got to test it. And if it's a hardware solution, you got to test it in an operational environment. You got to, create as close to a real scenario as you can and go do it. And you have to test it a couple times. You have to train your people to it. So if, I don't know, say there's some new taser. You guys, I think your agency has a taser that's like a Claymore mine, right? Is that something we can talk about?
Yeah, because we don't have it anymore because Taser stopped supporting it and we had to take it out of service.
Son of a bee. All right.
It legitimately saved a guy's life, though, one time.
Yep. So Taser made a thing that, I don't know what I would describe it as. Mike, can you describe it?
Yeah. So it's basically so if you imagine, like, a taser is a handheld device and it shoots out two probes that have wires on it. And so when those probes connect, there's an electrical current that goes through it. And if it goes just perfect, that electrical current will zap a guy and cause neuromuscular incapacitation and hopefully stop him from doing whatever he's doing. At the very least, you get pain compliance, but there's a possibility that you can also disable his motor function, his skeletal muscle function, right? It's not perfect. When it works well, when it works correctly, it works really, really well. It doesn't always work. Well, Taser came out with this box at some point that had several Taser cartridges. I think it was like 18 of them. And it fired like a row at a time. And
so you could sit this in a dude's front lawn.
Right.
And if you
it was
ran
like
out
an
of the
area
door
denial. Right.
Yeah.
So you can use that to stop a guy. And we used it once. It worked really well. And they stopped supporting it. And it's a bummer because it was a good option. So.
Yeah. So say I want to bring this into my agency, if magically they turn it back on. And the other people in my agency are not sold on it. They've not seen it work. And I just want to buy it and start using it. Well, before I bet somebody's life on it, either the perpetrator or my own team, I have to see it work. You gotta just do it. So you buy a couple extra ones, and that's going to cost money. You have to budget for testing, and you figure out what scenarios you're going to use it in, and then so you have a philosophy of use, or you have a concept of operations, con op for it, or con emp, concept of employment. And so you set up your criteria for when you're going to bust this thing out. You create a scenario, a training scenario where you're going to bust it out, and then you do it. And I don't know how you find someone who really wants to get tased, but I'm sure you can, or you pay them to get tased or whatever. And then you try it, and you try to get them to defeat it. And if it works despite them trying to defeat it, awesome. And if it doesn't work, you scrap it or you figure out how to fix it.
Yeah. One of the things that goes into that too about testing it is, let's say I have a new idea for a new tactic, and it's a problem that we have been solving for a long time. but it's a different tactic for that problem. Part of this testing process, to give it a fair shake and fair credit, involves testing it to the degree that matches your proficiency or experience with the old way. And so, for example, if I've got a team of guys, a SWAT team or a military unit doing close quarters combat, we're talking gunfights in structures, houses or structures, and I'm going to change that tactic a little bit. And your team or your group is very good at the way that they've been doing it, and you're going to change it. The only way to give that a fair shake is to make sure that you're good enough at it at the new way, right? To at least give you a fair comparison with the old way. And think about how long that old way took to shape it into whatever it is today.
So you need some spin up, you need some training, and you need some rehearsal with that new way. Yeah. And one of the other things that I would say, as far as you need to test these things, anytime you bring new hardware in, you have to test it. Your agency has to test it. It's not good enough if LAPD bought it or the Army bought it. You guys have to do it, because you have to understand how it's going to work within your rule set and within your tactics. And one of my favorite examples of that, there was a company selling IED detectors to Iraq. And these IED detectors looked like bent coat hangers. And the bent coat hangers were supposed to point to the bomb. Well, it turns out it's total bullshit. It's it was a fraud.
Sounds cool.
But the government of Iraq paid millions of dollars to this company to give them these bomb detectors. And at the time, there were so many IEDs, they were desperate. They were just throwing money at the problem. We, the U.S. government, were throwing money at the problem. And it turns out if just anybody had taken it out and tested it in an operationally realistic environment, they would have seen it.
Yeah.
And you have to test it more than once, because guess what? With that, the bent coat hanger thing, about half the time it will point in the general direction of a bomb. The other half the time it'll point away from the bomb. You just never know. So you got to do it enough times, enough iterations that you have a statistical confidence in what you're doing.
Yeah. And then constantly be ready to reevaluate and reassess. Be ready to change it. Don't be the guy that's stuck in their ways. There are tactics and strategies that have been proven over time, and some of those things are worth not changing. So part of being that visionary tactics guy is also being able to recognize that. One of the things that Boyd did was he created this briefing that was kind of the one that really made him famous, outside of just aviation anyway, called Patterns of Conflict. And he basically looked back at every recorded battle, war, conflict, armed conflict of any sort, and he started looking for the patterns. And it was stuff that went back to ancient civilizations all the way through modern times, and looking for the patterns, because a lot of the things that he really kind of preached about, and drawing parallels with Sun Tzu, The Art of War and stuff, was looking for those patterns that, no matter what, they're always true. Like, for example, in those major incidents, communication's always a problem. Span of control's always a problem. There's going to be certain things that it's just going to always work, right? It's always going to be part of the reality that you're faced with. So you have to accept that at some point, and then you have to be ready for new problems to solve, because there's always going to be something new every time you come
along
up with
those lines. One of my pet peeves is phrases like "think outside the box." Well, thanks, Sun Tzu. That doesn't necessarily help. How do I come up with that creative answer? Or know your enemy? Oh, okay.
Think outside the box, or and this is where brainstorming, right? You brainstorm, and you don't put a cap on it. Let the crazy guy talk. Invite them, right? No idea is a bad idea. Let's throw shit at the wall until we come up with something. And if it sounds crazy, think about it.
Another thing I would offer is, at what point do you need to protect your tactics? How secret do you need to keep your tactics? And ideally, if your tactics are sound enough, even if the dirtbags know exactly what you're going to do, they're still at a disadvantage, right? And consider things like a traffic stop. Every bad guy on earth knows fundamentally what you're going to do on a traffic stop. Now, maybe there's some sleight of hand that you're prepared to do, that your agency does, and that's great. But you need to think about what's the damage if the bad guys figure out that this is what we do. And maybe it's a tactic that's you hold it in your back pocket until you really, really need it.
Bad guy tactics. We talked about switching license plates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it works. You know, what do they say? 60% of the time, it works every time.
Every time, yeah.
It works until it doesn't, right? And so that I think that's part of it, is having that honest conversation with yourself, and that's what I think Jim's getting at.
Like, what's the cost? What's the cost if they figure it out?
Yep. All right. Remember that you can find new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can find us on social media. We're at Tac Tangents, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're on Spotify now, so if you don't like the outlet that you're using, you can go to Spotify, and be sure to check out our new sponsor, Right On Optics. If you go to rightonoptics.com, you can use their military public safety pricing, which is really good. And if you don't qualify for that discount, you can use the discount code TACTangents to get 15% off. Either way, make sure they know that we sent you, because we'll appreciate it. It helps support the show, and that's all we got. Take care.